The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Hi, this is Ashley Eckstein, the voice of Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you.
You're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars, episode 91.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Ciolana, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away, including the deeper themes and meanings. Just a reminder to please don't be greedy Greedo. Share the podcast on Twitter or Facebook and leave us a review also to let us know how we're doing. And besides satisfying our curiosity, your feedback also helps us get the show seen by more people who would be interested in listening to this show. Now, today we are picking up our series of character-devoted episodes and getting ready for the Book of Boba Fett. So we will be taking a deeper look at Boba's dear old dad, the bounty hunter, the clone template, Jango Fett. And so, therefore, we are putting Father Fett in the hot seat this week. Father Andrew Kinstetter, thank you for being a Fett superfan and being on the panel this week.
Absolutely, but I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Oh, man, I should have seen that coming.
Oh, I couldn't resist.
All right. Well, I know that you probably have many more of those in your holster, but let's just briefly touch on some news items here. And mainly the big one is Star Wars Visions. Of course, we are eagerly awaiting that series, which will be releasing on September the 22nd. And that is, of course, a forthcoming series of 9 anime short films straight from 6 acclaimed Japanese anime studios. Those of you who are listening, maybe you've found yourself wondering, are they going to be geeking out over those on Secrets of Star Wars? And the answer is, hi, yes, we will. So hi is Japanese for yes, if you didn't know that. So we'll be looking forward to that for sure. So that'll be coming up in late September and maybe October. Who knows how everything will pan out for us and the podcast, but certainly we will be talking about that. And so look forward to that. All right, so let's set the scene and kind of refresh our memories here about Jango Fett. So I will be pulling this straight from Wikipedia. Thank you very much. Jango Fett was a Mandalorian human male bounty hunter and the clone template of the Grand Army of the Republic. What a title. He was known as the best bounty hunter in the galaxy during the final years of the Galactic Republic. And Fett was proficient in marksmanship as well as unarmed combat. Hailing from the planet Concord Dawn, Fett was a foundling of the Mandalorians and at one point fought in the Mandalorian Civil Wars before becoming a bounty hunter. Prior to the Clone Wars, the Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus hired Fett to serve as the genetic foundation of an army secretly bred on the extragalactic world of Kamino. His DNA spawned millions of clone troopers who shared his face, voice, and were trained to become soldiers. As part of his payment, Fett was given an unaltered clone, whom he raised as his son, Boba Fett. In the last days of the Separatist crisis, Fett was, this is Jango Fett, of course, was involved in the failed plot to assassinate Senator Padme Amidala on Coruscant. The Jedi Order investigated the incident, forcing Fett to leave the Kaminoan homeworld after he was confronted by Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kenobi tracked Fett to Geonosis, where he discovered the bounty hunter's connection with Count Dooku. Dun dun dun, and the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Fett fought against the Jedi assault team during the first Battle of Geonosis and was memorably beheaded by Jedi Master Mace Windu. So truly a memorable end. But we are only beginning here. So first of all, Father Fett, do you know off the top of your head how much screen time Jango Fett has in Star Wars?
You know, I was thinking about that, and I put that in my notes that he doesn't get enough. But I never,
an opinion.
I never actually counted it up. But in reality, I mean, it's got to be really short. I mean, he's
let's do a Price is Right.
Oh boy,
what do you think?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say out of a 2-hour movie, I would give him 25 minutes.
Lower.
Is it? Oh my
Much
gosh. Lower. You looked this up. Okay, 15 minutes.
Much lower.
Much lower. Okay, 8 minutes.
Yes. Lower.
5?
Lower.
Oh, geez. 3.
Higher.
Okay, 4.
Okay, so it's 4:45. So he had 4 minutes and 45 seconds of screen time. So we are going to somehow talk about this character. No, this is going to be an amazing discussion, but it is really, Star Wars is known for this though, right? Like creating these massive, fandoms around these characters that have really, honestly, like very little screen time. So does that come as a shock to you, Father?
It does, because in my mind, he played a much larger role. You forced me to like recontextualize my junior high experience of going to the theaters and seeing Attack of the Clones.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't mean to destroy any dreams or castles in your mind. Okay.
You totally, you nailed it though, in that like, okay, he had 4 minutes of screen time, but he had this huge impact in me as a junior high kid. So much so that like, that's kind of been my gig in my online persona, right? 4 minutes of screen time, and he's my guy.
Well, to your credit, he's got some comic stuff going on and some other mentions in other, I think probably just the amount of times that he has been mentioned and discussed in other canon, material is actually maybe the same or more than his actual screen time in the movies. So
yeah, his legacy is much bigger than maybe the amount that we see him in the movie.
We'll go with that. Okay. So in general, well, you call yourself Father Fett, right? So is that after Boba or Jango?
It is after Jango. And the whole point, the point there, I guess, for me was, I found him intriguing as when I went to the theater. So, I mean, if you have ever been involved in our May 4th discussions, you'll know that Attack of the Clones was kind of the movie that brought me into becoming a Star Wars geek through and through. And I blame a lot of it in a good way on Jango Fett. And there is something to be said about that. I love knowing like there's a character, but he's got a mysterious background. I think that's what drew a lot of people even to like Han Solo in the original trilogy, is like he's this kind of cool smuggler, but you don't really know, where he came from or anything. And so I've always found Jango Fett intriguing, but as a junior high kid, I mean, I don't want to be I don't want to be superficial about it, but
sure.
But as a junior high kid, I loved his armor. I loved his look. I loved his fighting style. The attack with Obi-Wan and his ship. And so as a junior high kid, what drew me to him was not anything deep other than that he was cool. It would be just like someone who, liked a character. In fact, I mean, that's kind of how Boba Fett kind of came into existence, was like people just saw this character who didn't really have a whole big part, but they liked his look. Like he would be one you would go out and buy an action figure of because he has this cool look to him. So as I've kind of grown in my fandom and even my Father Fett persona, I just have to kind of point out that I'm glad he's a fictional character, because like, especially as a Catholic priest, like it's morally perfectly fine to like the villain of a story, you know, and not that we aspire to be, you know, like them, because it's pretty clear that Django's morality is very skewed. It's you know, he's looking out for himself and isn't necessarily the most moral, upright person. So, you know, I'm drawn to him because I think he's a fun villain. He's a cool villain. And so I'm glad he's a fictional character, because I can do that and it fits, and it's a fun geeky thing to then talk about, because then you can have the conversations about, you know, well, exactly what we're doing. Well, what makes him a villain, and why is that good or bad, or, you know, what's his story, and we can have those discussions and then get into the deeper topics, which is always what we like to do here on the podcast.
Yeah. And, you know, something that you said really kind of changed something that I had planned. So we will see how that goes later on. But so what, I mean, you know, you kind of basically said what you think of Django's character, but is there anything else that really kind of, I mean, I guess, you know, and anything that you now in your fandom and your, you know, Father Fett persona, or however you want to put it, is anything you see in the fandom of Jango Fett kind of really stand out, besides, you know, basically that he looked cool and he had cool stuff?
I would maybe say two things. And I'm sorry if I'm going to jump over what you have planned, but
no, it's okay.
I think definitely point number one is that the fandom has really gravitated towards whether he's a Mandalorian or not. And so that's been a big part of it. And the other thing that I think we will get into a deeper discussion on is, okay, he's a cool villain. He looks cool. He fights cool. You know, he's a bounty hunter. But I think there is something deeper to be said about his character. And I think we see that in his desire to have an unaltered clone for himself that he wants to raise as a son. And of course, that's Boba Fett.
Right.
But beyond,
I kind of... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but beyond that, the fandom around Jango Fett is more... people dress up as him at conventions, at comic conventions, you know, but I think in terms of like the deeper, the lore, I think people gravitate towards Boba Fett more than they do Jango Fett for that kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why I was kind of interested in what you had to say about the fandom of Jango Fett, because I know you're far more familiar with that than a lot of us are. So yeah, that's neat. And we will get into every single one of those topics that you discussed. Honestly, when I was pondering this particular podcast and discussion, I came to the conclusion for myself, and maybe my opinion will change after our little talk here, but I came to the conclusion that I think of him more as a story device for George Lucas than a character that he meant to flesh out and really develop. And this is Jango, you know. I think he meant much more for the Boba character, but I felt like Jango was just sort of the guy who needed to be the template for the clone army. And so George wrote this character and bada bing, you know, maybe throw a couple little things in there, but really I find his character to be not important outside of that so much. Now, again, we will get into his relationship with Boba, but that was kind of the way that I saw things.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think after the great success of the original trilogy and the fandom that rose up for Boba Fett, it was natural to ask the question, well, where did Boba Fett come from? And so I think you're right. I think George Lucas found this way to have this character who looked like Boba Fett, but different, then kind of make him a mysterious figure, and then have that tie into where did Boba Fett come from. So I suspect he was created out of that purpose rather than as sort of a character that meant to be kind of stand on his own. And yeah, and of course the Clone Army, he could meld those two together as part of the mystery of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, would you consider him to be a good character, or would you consider him to be more of, you know, kind of like what I was saying, like more of a character, but really a good story device? Maybe this is challenging for you. I'm so sorry if I'm like pushing the wrong buttons, but
no,
I kind of, you know, we talk about like what makes them a good character.
You're stretching my notions of him that I've had for decades, and that's good. My problem is I have so much invested in him that it's hard for me to see him as, you know, just a kind of a plot device. And but like, if I kind of just take a look at this objectively, I mean, I think you're right. There's not much there. He's a bounty hunter, and he happened to be, you know, the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, quote unquote, and he happened to be this superb fighter, and that was what became the Clone Army. Now, I've developed kind of a deeper connection to him after the movie, and that's something I think that a lot of people didn't do, because there are additional comics and video games that tried to go into his backstory that many people have never even picked up and read. And of course, at this point, yeah, sure, they're all Legends material. But one of them, and I'm going to share this. It's a PlayStation 2 game that I'm holding up and showing Angela, called Star Wars Bounty Hunter, and I think it's still available digitally if you have a PlayStation 4, but I'm not sure because I don't have one of those. But this was a game that you play as Jango Fett, and it tried to tell the story of how Count Dooku found him and chose him to be the template for the Clone Army. And so you play as Jango Fett, and you encounter Zam Wesell, and you are trying to I think I can't remember exactly how it works, but I think you're trying to track down and kill a dark Jedi. And if you succeed in that, then Count Dooku picks you as the template for the Clone Army. And so this game, though, humanized him, because you play as the protagonist, and you're yeah, I guess even as I play it, like I'm already looking at through the lens of like a good morality. And so, like, you know, you're the way that it humanizes him, like you're going after this crime syndicate that's dealing death sticks, and they're bad guys. And so what you're doing is good from a certain point of view, right? But there was, and the characters that he interacts with, and Tamara Morrison actually does the voice for it. So it really kind of draws the character out. And I think this game maybe solidified some of that underlying connection to him and brought his story more in the forefront for me. And it was just a lot of fun. I mean, you actually have the ability to see bounties on people as you're going through the worlds, and you can claim bounties on people as you encounter them for whatever reason. And so you're still a bounty hunter, and it's all Jango Fett. But of course, like, that story is not canon. You know, that's all part of the Legends universe. And even the comic that I mentioned that's also Legends material. But some of the ideas and the what was put into the comics came through in canon. So things like Jango Fett being from the planet Concord Dawn, and being a foundling and being brought in by a Mandalorian named Jaster. That all came from this comic, Star Wars Jango Fett Open Seasons. So, yeah, I think if you look at his character strictly from a movie perspective, right, it is easy to draw the conclusion that he's a pretty face and serves as a plot device. But like all the characters in Star Wars, which, I mean, if you've ever read their newer books, from a certain point of view, they kind of retell some of the scenes in like A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back from the side characters. I think you made a really good point earlier that like Star Wars does a phenomenal job of like looking at some of those insignificant characters and saying, hey, they have stories too. And so that's kind of how I look at Jango Fett, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That, I mean, if I had been in your shoes, I think, being a little boy, or how old were you when you saw episode?
It was 2003, so I was 14. So
okay,
yeah.
Being an adolescent boy,
and
like going to the movies,
jetpack so bad,
and then playing this. It sounds like a great game, and all of just the other things. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, what you're saying, and just your connection to Jango. Absolutely. Now, you talked about his morality as being sort of like playing as the protagonist in the video game, but then in the movies and stuff, he is, I mean, you use the term villain, and I honestly was not going to go that far. So, a lot of times in Star Wars, we talk about, is this character a hero? Are they a villain? Or are they kind of like a scoundrel? So I was going to go with the scoundrel aspect.
That's a better position to put him in, to be fair.
Yeah, because I didn't really see him as like totally a villain per se. I think a lot of times the bounty hunters really kind of fall under that middle ground scoundrel territory, because ultimately there's somebody above them that is hiring them to do the job. And so those people are the villains, right? So, so I was going to kind of ask, if why you had called him a villain. I guess it was just because of, his questionable choices.
Yeah, I think I use that term only because that's sort of how he's portrayed in the movie. At least he's portrayed on the side of Count Dooku, even though really it's only because Count Dooku's paying him.
Yeah. And obviously he's just trying to get the job done, right? Like when we first see him, he's definitely doing something that is against our heroes, right? And so you want to maybe think of him immediately as a villain, but I think, looking at the overall picture, I would call him a scoundrel. So
yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, talking about sort of the character development of Jango, right? And again, when you go into the actual screen time, there isn't much character development that you can have in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. So when it comes to the prequels, we really got nothing. But I would say, there is a lot to talk about his character development in a way, like over the course of, since the time that he was introduced until present day, because you mentioned that question of, was Jango Fett an actual Mandalorian? And of course, that question was surrounding Boba as well before that, right? So when we get to Jango, it's like, okay, well, if we can get the dad down, then maybe we'll understand Boba better, right? So can you kind of give us an overview of sort of how all of that developed, like how we went from here's Jango Fett in the armor to where we are now?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially, the way that it happened in the Legends universe before Disney took over, or well, really before the Clone Wars, the animated show, it was just automatically assumed that Jango Fett was a Mandalorian because that's, he was wearing Mandalorian armor, and that's what was portrayed in the Legends material. He was, even in the comic, I mean, he was brought into the Mandalorian culture by Jaster and becomes, I think he's listed at one point as like the last Mandalorian that's ever lived. And I think maybe that played into why Count Dooku wanted him to be the template for the clone army. And so it was sort of undisputed for a long, long time that Jango Fett was what a Mandalorian should be. And I think that the culture, the Mandalorian culture that George Lucas wanted to develop was contrary to Jango Fett's personality. I mean, Jango Fett is a bounty hunter, and the Mandalorian culture, as we see it in the Clone Wars, is a society. It's a community vastly different than this fierce, independent bounty hunter. And so I think,
and it's got like a loyalty code and some kind of moral code. Yeah.
Yep. And so I think, you know, what George Lucas wanted to create in the culture, he had to separate it from Jango Fett somewhat to make it clear that the way that Jango lived his life was not like universal for Mandalorians. And so then in the Clone Wars, we have some of this starting to play out when we go to Mandalore. And even the sticking point for many of us became season 2, episode 12, the Mandalore plot, where Obi-Wan Kenobi meets up with Prime Minister Almec on Mandalore. And Prime Minister Almec makes the comment that Jango Fett was just a common bounty hunter, and he didn't even know where Jango Fett got the armor. And that's all that was said.
Remember, yeah, when that happened, it was like the fandom went crazy. Like everybody lost their heads.
Right, because it upended something that we just thought was indisputable. And so then it became this lingering question. Well, like, okay, well, what happened? And if he's just a common bounty hunter, where did he get the armor? And of course, you know, many of us probably just said, well, I'll just headcanon that, and he's really, you know, just a rogue Mandalorian, or, you know, however you want to deal with it. And then kind of fast forward to season 2 of The Mandalorian, where Din Djarin encounters Boba Fett in it was episode 6 of season 2, so The Tragedy. And that's when we sort of kind of got final confirmation of what was going on, because Boba Fett shows Din his chain code that's built into his armor, and he tells Din that the armor belonged to his father. And so in that chain code is, you know, there's a list of things, and it's all in Arabesh. And of course, Star Wars fans immediately translated it. And what's really cool is that Jango Fett is listed in there as Father Fett. So that I thought was really cool. But more importantly,
like, it's me,
right? Like I'm in the show. More importantly, we learn that Jango Fett was a foundling, just like Din Djarin was, and that Jango was brought in by a Mandalorian named Jaster, and Concord Dawn is also listed in that chain code as well. So then we finally know, okay, so Jango is a Mandalorian in the same way that Din Djarin is a Mandalorian, and everything's all back to how we feel it should be. Except for Jango then, of course, went off to be a bounty hunter, but still a Mandalorian.
Yeah. You know, I want to say, just to comment before I ask you how you feel about this whole, how it turned out. I want to say that I think it's pretty awesome because clearly this decision was probably, the decision to kind of do what they did on The Mandalorian with Jango Fett and Boba Fett and their history. I think it was pretty much a Jon Favreau decision with the support of, the other executive producers at Lucasfilm, the story group, whatever. And because, Jon Favreau has talked about how big of a Boba Fett fan he is, and how I know he was probably, and I think he might have even talked about this somewhere, that he was kind of like just weirded out, I guess, by this idea that Jango Fett was not a Mandalorian, that Boba was not a Mandalorian. And so he really, I think, had a personal interest, in being the guy with the toys in the sandbox, literally, to be able to just do it, just make it so, right? And so he did. And I think it's awesome that he did that. So I like that aspect of it, that now the kids that grew up with this stuff are old enough to actually influence the canon going forward, the way that they would have played with it in their rooms at home as kids. So that's really cool. But, you know, one of the things that you said, I'd never even thought about, that George Lucas kind of needed to separate Jango from the Mandalorian culture as he wanted to create it and kind of present it in the Clone Wars series, which very much made an impression on me, and I'm sure a lot of people. Like when we saw how Mandalore was, how the Mandalorian culture was, it was very distinct from the other cultures that George had created, and it was very impressive. So so Jango, just as a bounty hunter in it for himself, didn't really fit that.
And we wouldn't have had, if Jango would have been a quote unquote true Mandalorian from the get-go, George would have had to have created a Mandalorian culture that was based on this, you know, fierce warrior identity rather than where he really wanted to go with the Mandalorian culture.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does make sense that if you take Concord Dawn, right, and then you kind of, because that was related to kind of the more extremist Mandalorians, right? And kind of the warrior Mandalorians.
It's funny because in the comic, I was kind of glancing back through it before the show. He is taken in by Jaster, who is opposing Death Watch. But of course that's all legend. So I mean it's they, you know, so they've sort of kind of played loose with some of those subcultures and stuff. But yeah, so just kind of interesting that like Din was of course brought up by Death Watch, but canonically.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, now that considering all that we know about the Mandalorians in canon, as someone who grew up with the Legends content about Jango and Boba and the Mandalorians, how do you see all of this development? Are you happy with the way everything has kind of been canonized, or would you have wanted them to change some stuff?
I am actually very happy with what they've done with it. I think initially when I watched the Clone Wars episodes with the Mandalorians, I was sort of like, they're pacifists? What? Like this doesn't fit my mental image of the Mandalorians. But then watching the story go forward, it totally makes sense. I mean, they were, you know, this kind of warriors, and of course we hear about all the wars, and even Jango Fett, I think in the Chain Code is mentioned as fighting in the Mandalorian Civil War. So like they are warriors, but they've also, of course, grown and recognized that war isn't the answer to everything. You know, and that's where, okay, if you really want the fierce fighting, then just pay attention to Death Watch and you can kind of get your fill there. But ultimately, it seemed like the best way to merge the two. That, okay, Jango Fett isn't a true Mandalorian in the sense of like, you know, he was born and raised on Mandalore, but he is a Mandalorian because he was adopted. And I think it felt like just an organic kind of way to explain and bring the two together. Unlike, and this is going to be controversial, but not controversial at all, unlike how Rey is a Skywalker.
Oh, I see. Yes.
So I think with Jango, it felt right that this was a way to explain how he is a Mandalorian, but you can also see that he is not a Mandalorian. So it's kind of a cool like dichotomy there. Right.
Well, you know, as we talk about this, we have to, of course, talk about Boba, right? And I would say probably one of my favorite things about Jango, actually, I don't really care. Like I appreciate the armor, and you know, it does look very cool and everything, but I'm really not that kind of geek myself. Sure. I'm not like a tech and, you know, that kind of person. So my favorite thing about about Jango is that he requested Boba, that he wanted to have a son. He wanted to have a relationship with a son. And obviously in his line of work, you know, you can't really just kind of settle down and have a family because It would be horrible for your family. You'd have to hide them away somewhere to not be in trouble of being kidnapped all the time. Right. So the fact that he had a son that he could just keep by his side, you know, that's what he thought, at least, all the time, was, I think, very admirable and kind of unexpected, considering everything else about him and even his demeanor, you know, on screen. The way that he was portrayed just seemed very kind of like, I don't know if this was a George Lucas directing thing or a Tamara Morrison choice or whatever, but to me, it just kind of came off as like a little bit not really expressive.
He's kind of gruff and
yeah. So I just thought that was an unexpected element to his character. If we're going from episode 1 to 2, you know, right, and not going backwards and knowing that Boba had to have a father, right? So I wanted to ask you what your favorite quality is of Jango.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, definitely. Well, I want to focus on his desire to be a father, because that is also one of my favorite aspects of him too. And I do want to point out that I think his desire to be a father fits when you have the big picture in context. So this is definitely if you just watch episode 2, it's sort of like, okay, like what's going on here, you know. But then with developing stories and stuff, it kind of paints a bigger picture, you know.
Right,
so
with the Mandalorian and the foundling thing and all that.
Right. So the fact that he was a foundling and was brought in, you know, totally makes sense that maybe he would want to do the same thing for someone else. And yet he sort of does it, of course, in a immoral way. You know, to jump into a little bit of Catholic theology here, you know, cloning is inherently immoral from a Catholic standpoint, because it's opposed to the dignity both of human procreation and the conjugal union. So I mean, you know, we talk about the clones all the time and we love the clones, and you know, but we're in this fictional world where we can kind of have those conversations. But he didn't actually like go and adopt a foundling, but he had a clone. But it's the desire to be a father. And I also wanted to point out a little bit of just human nature here, is that that's also part of human nature. You know, that's how God created us. And even I pulled up Genesis 1:28. So when God created Adam and Eve, and, you know, he says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And like that is just built into who we are as humans, is that we want to, you know, continue to expand the human culture. You know, we want to have kids and grandkids, and you know, that's just natural part of us. So the fact that he wants to be a father fits all of that, and it fits his larger story as we know it, and it happens to give us the backstory to Boba, which I think was maybe the starting point, and then they built the story around him, you know, rather than starting with the big story and then say, oh yeah, and then he had Boba Fett as a clone son.
Right. You know, and just to kind of jump back to that cloning aspect too, I think a lot of people who may not be Catholic would say, well, obviously humanity would want to expand and have this desire to procreate just to from an evolutionary standpoint, which, by the way, Catholics can, you know, adhere to the idea of evolution as a theory, but maybe as an explanation for everything, no, right? So the idea that, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that we need to continue our species, and so we want to procreate. But the Catholic idea is, it goes beyond that. It's no, like, it's not just that we just want to have, you know, kids and just continue the species, but it's also because of a desire in our heart to care for someone. It's like we were saying from scripture, it says to be fruitful. And this concept of loving someone that is your child, you know, loving someone, caring for them, taking care of them, and bringing them up in a loving home. That's a different concept, right? Than simply, just, all right, let's just get the kids and just do this thing because we got to do it.
Right.
And we got to keep going.
And
we got to survive.
That's what separates us from animals. Animals don't have the same sense of love. And of course, animals are going to procreate because that's, again, part of their nature. But human nature, the way that God created us, is elevated. And we have that element of love. We have that element of, we are co-creators with God when we engage in that and create a new life. And there's something, much more deeper and profound than just continuing the species.
Yeah. So if we could we're jumping into maybe lessons learned here from Django. So to kind of, I guess, piggyback on this discussion here, the idea of cloning, I think we should just talk about a little bit more because Django is the clone template and really this is the opportunity to talk about it. The idea of cloning coming from the dark side, I think, was intentional on Lucas's part. And the reason being that cloning necessarily involves control and manipulation of a human being and the human being. And, later on, the Empire would apparently just simply discard the clones, right, in favor of this mass of soldiers from various planets. We've talked about their service to the Empire would help guarantee Palpatine's control over the entire galaxy. So that was kind of his prerogative to just get rid of the clones and get all these people from all these other planets. But so I think just the idea of the clone army, even though Lucas finds the humanity in the clones themselves as individual persons, the way that they were manufactured is still, I think, intentionally separated from the clones themselves within Star Wars.
I think that's a very profound insight for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any other lessons learned from Jango Fett? Yeah.
So the big one that I focused on as I was contemplating this, and it goes back to his desire for a son. And so I quoted it sort of, I said, a life lived for oneself is not fulfilling. And I think that played a role in why he wanted a son. Perhaps, he was a foundling and wanted to have a son as sort of a fulfillment of his own being brought in by Jaster. But ultimately, I think if you look at Jango Fett or anyone who's living just that kind of independent life, that self-sufficient, selfish life, ultimately, Django's gonna do the job for the highest payer, and really that's a life all about yourself. And I think the fact that he even desires a son shows that he recognizes that there's more than just the job, there's more than the money, and ultimately we find meaning in other people. We find meaning in God, and of course we find meaning in loving as he loved us, but we have to have someone to love, and so that's kind of, I think, maybe he didn't quite think about it this deeply, but I think that prompted him to want an unaltered clone for himself that he could essentially love and care for as a son.
Yeah, I think it was, like you're saying, it was innate in him. I think, as I was preparing for this discussion, I was looking up some of the more recent canon developments that I was not familiar with. And one was in the comic Age of the Republic Jango Fett, where he basically, he calls the clone army cannon fodder. It's very clear that he is not proud of being the clone template. He's not proud of the clone army. They're just cannon fodder. But so this idea of, like you're saying, right, the money and being a bounty hunter was not enough,
right,
for him. And being being the clone template was not enough for him. It didn't satisfy him, didn't do anything for him, even though his voice, his face, everybody would know his name, like all throughout the galaxy. If you can imagine that, like just imagine your face and your voice, like
Right.
all over the galaxy. Wow. But it wasn't a big deal for him. And so this idea that no, his son was important to him. I mean, we can see that just in the minimal interactions that we see on screen,
Mm-hmm.
you know, between him and Boba, that he wants to protect Boba, like when Obi-Wan comes and starts talking to him about business, you know, and dark, shadowy things. And he's like, you know, Boba, go to your room type of thing, you know, and then they're in trouble and he yells for Boba to get into the ship as they're leaving. Just little small things. And you can tell, obviously, when he dies that Boba really cared about him. And then throughout Boba's story, which maybe we'll get into in a future episode, you know, there was a strong bond there. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I wrote that down too as a lesson learned is, you know, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that. The idea that just surviving, basically getting the essentials that you need to survive, is the bottom of the pyramid. And then as you go up, you know, you get more things that, you know, relationships, social status, things like that. But ultimately, you know, your fulfillment doesn't come from stuff and recognition even. It comes from that, I think, self-fulfillment, or that fulfillment that he received from the love that he had with Boba.
Mm-hmm. And I think we see, I mean, we can see that played out just by looking at, you know, Hollywood today, of some of those people who are super, you know, super popular and super famous, that they're not fully happy. They're miserable. The ones that aren't are the ones that have found, you know, the family and the fulfillment of relationships more than just the fame and fortune. So,
yeah. So maybe next time we are sad because we don't have the latest thing that we think can fill that hole in our heart, we need to kind of look at the people around us and say, Jango Fett.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that brings up another point. When I was in Guatemala for 8 weeks, I mean, you often find, this isn't universally true, so I don't want to stereotype, but you often find that the poorer someone is, the happier that they are. So like these people in Guatemala, I mean, they had nothing compared to what middle class is in America. And yet they're the happiest people, and they're so friendly and sociable. And I mean, it's all, for them, it's way more focused on family than, unfortunately, we see in our culture sometimes. And so, you know, it's almost helpful to look at their example to say, okay, yeah, material things, fleeting happiness, not real happiness.
Yeah. Good stuff.
One other lesson learned, this one's just a more kind of fun, silly one that I put down, was never assume that you're better than a Jedi. Because I think Jango does this when he thinks he knocks Obi-Wan off the edge of the platform on Kamino, and he thinks that he destroys him with his sonic charges in the asteroid belt, and then he thinks he can somehow protect himself from Mace Windu, and basically failed on all three fronts. So,
ooh, yeah, and that was a deadly mistake.
Absolutely.
Well, with that,
not to kill the conversation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, the dad jokes abound. Quite fitting.
I am Father Fett, so.
Yes. And we are talking about a very famous father here. So do you have of course you do. What are your favorite moments with Jango, whether in the films or otherwise? I'll open it up. So any other, even Legend stuff.
Well, I would say that I'll mention a few of them, and I've already mentioned them already, but the fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi on the platform on Kamino is definitely maybe my favorite moment with him, just because it's an awesome fight scene. And he does manage to get the upper hand on Obi-Wan, even though he doesn't fully successfully push him off. He manages to subdue him enough to get away. So, also just, cool use of the jetpack and the rocket launcher. And so especially as a 14-year-old, he that's cool. The other big one, and I know that I am not the only one that loved this, but was in the asteroid belt with the sonic charges. And
yes, one of the coolest sounds in Star Wars.
Well, and yeah, total kind of side note here. We had just installed surround sound in our living room. And this was one of those scenes that even my dad would join us, and we would kind of play over and over because we could hear it fill the living room in the surround sound. It was it was cool. So when the sonic charges came back in The Mandalorian, there were cheers heard across the galaxy. And then finally, I would say, just in general, the experience of the Star Wars Bounty Hunter video game was cool. I don't have any specific memories of it. It's been too long since I've played it, but I remember thoroughly enjoying it and getting to know Jango as a character, and not just apparently just 4 minutes on film. So those are my favorite moments.
Yeah. I wanted to say my favorite moment was when Disney renamed his ship Firespray from Slave One, but there has been no official announcement, contrary to internet rumors.
Mm-hmm.
His ship has not been renamed. It has always rubbed me the wrong way that his ship is named Slave One, but no, there's only been hints from Lego sets that
they're calling it just the Firespray, but
the Firespray, yeah.
But a Firespray is a type of ship rather than a name. Although sometimes you sort of use the two interchangeably. So, and to be honest, I don't actually know what the origins of the name Slave One, where that came from. So I can't even I don't even know. Jango didn't have any slaves. So I don't know. Maybe there's some history with the ship.
That would be problematic for you, Father.
Yeah, add to my moral dilemma here. Yeah.
Okay, well, with that being said, do you have any other things you wanted to throw in about Jango, or for that matter, Temuera Morrison, although we may, of course, be discussing him later on as time goes?
No, other than I would just encourage people, if you want to know more about the character, to if you have a PlayStation 4, to pick up that game, or to pick up the comics, both Open Seasons, which is a Legends comic, but then Angela, you also mentioned there was one Age of the Republic Jango Fett, which I have not read yet, but I will definitely have to go check that one out. So yeah, he's a character that is worth. I think he's worth exploring a little more into.
Well, I certainly enjoyed our discussion.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I pulled a lot away from this. So all of you who are listening, what are your thoughts and opinions on Jango Fett? Please let us know. And be sure to email us at starwars@sqpn.com. Or find StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. And you can leave a comment there. Let us know what you think. Or you can simply tweet us at SQPN. So before we reveal next week's topic, we would like to thank our patrons who truly make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Wars, including Pat S., Al R., Julia S., Sean M., and Anthony S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Wars and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show. Please, please find us and tell your friends to subscribe. Also in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. And you can find previous episodes of Secrets of Star Wars at sqpn.com/Star Wars. Well, if you've ever found yourself thinking, hey, how can I tell people in a totally non-threatening or preachy way that there is hope out there in the world and in the galaxy? Well, you can do so by getting an official Secrets of Star Wars t-shirt. And we do indeed have these t-shirts for the show that encapsulates our philosophy of finding hope in a galaxy far, far away. So those are, of course, available in various sizes and styles to fit everyone, from a Porg to a Wookiee. So you can get yours at sqpn.com/merch. And we will be back in 2 weeks where we will be taking a deeper look into Boba Fett himself. And there will be even more to talk about then. So until next time, Father Andrew Kinstetter, Father Fett, thank you for joining me in this Secrets of Star Wars.
Always a pleasure to meet a Jedi.
I don't know about that high praise, but once again, I am Angela Ciolana, and thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.